Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you're good. I'm Jack Chew. This is Chewing It Over. We come here weekdays, or at least most weekdays these days, 12:30 till 1 o'clock, and we chew over whatever is topical in the world, usually of MSK, therapies, education, that sort of thing. And I was in two minds whether to do this topic or how to do this topic, because if I'm a commentator on what is topical, and that's what this show is about, then the thing that was sort of lighting things up over the last couple of days is the JOSPT's new low back pain guidelines. And it did so for two key reasons. One was that it was interesting, some of the content, the style, the methodologies, the conclusions that they came to was something that somewhat of a surprise to some people, and some people frustrated by that. But then what ensued was that there was then some copyright related dramas over the legitimacy or not of sharing, say, screenshots and things like that, the article, even though it was open access. But less than that, it was being commented on in fair use principles by what was assumed by many, and certainly not an intentional passing off of material, which is what would normally get a copyright strike. But then, yes, some legal heavy-handedness, arguably by some, applied by JOSPT and JLSOPT. And so, yeah, it was interesting. I admittedly wasn't close enough to the sort of center of that, certainly me personally, but also I wasn't paying attention in real time to it, and I've not had the time even to get stuck into the whole article. So I was like, do I comment on it in passing? Do I do a show on it? But if I do, I will need to admit, as I just have, that I wasn't close to that and wasn't necessarily, haven't got stuck into the meat of the article yet, although I have by now skimmed it. But then, fortunately, I text Meakins, who was sort of, as you know, of course, the centre of most internet drama in our space, you can imagine, was involved in many ways, and he was free, and so he's going to join me on the show, and I will be asking, but I'm not playing dumb, right? I've just said to Adam, right, I'm asking questions because I genuinely want to know the sort of timeline and time frame. So I assure you, as I've assured him, I'm not playing dumb when I ask the questions about what happened. But then, of course, you know, from what I can gather of it, I have my opinions, which I won't shy away from. So hopefully, in a couple of clicks, I can bring you Adam Meakins. Adam, are you here?
I am here. Thanks, Jack, for the invite.
Brilliant. No, thanks, mate, and thanks in such short notice. You can't find your microphone, and therefore I might start echoing. If I do, then the audience needs to let me know that, and we will try to toggle the mute button. Above all else, I will shut up for a bit. Could you tell folk a little bit about what's happened, because I'm not well placed to do so. So what's gone
on? Long story or short story, mate? What do you want?
I want the long story. We've got half an hour, haven't we? So I want. Okay. Well, first thing is, tell me about the article.
Yes, JOSPT published a update on their low back pain clinical guidelines, which are, I don't know whether it's funded or sponsored by the American Physical Therapy Association. So these are American physiotherapy guidelines for physiotherapy management of acute and chronic low back pain. And this is an update from 2012 onto these guidelines. So these were published on Tuesday. Yep, there you go. Careful with that image, mate. You might get yourself already into some hot water, because I don't think it's been appropriately cropped.
We'll come on to that. I tell you what's funny. Look, I think each of us have got to lean either side of this image. Other way. There we go. Right. So I'll put it off because that's getting in our way. But these guidelines came out, right?
Yeah, so these guidelines, it's a 60-page document. They're open access. It's freely available. There's no paywall behind them. And so they were published on Tuesday, and obviously they started to be circulated. They started to generate some conversations on social media. And I saw Physio Meets Science. And if you don't know Physio Meets Science Twitter account, you should, because it's an excellent account run by some German physiotherapists who constantly and regularly, you know, signpost current publications out there. They posted the guidelines. They took a couple of screenshots of the title page and the main infographics embedded within this 60-page document that sort of summarize, give a synopsis of the findings of this research. And as we most do, you know, we tend to look at these, we skim read it, and then we comment on it. And this
a bit like what I've just done there is that's a shot from one of the summary documents that sort of tables that, and that's quite a classic thing to post on socials, isn't it? That it gives context.
Exactly right. So, you know, most people, you know, when they are presenting research and data, they do it in picture form, infographic form, because it's easier to look at, it's easier to interpret than actually obviously diving into the figures and the text and everything. So again, this had been obviously going around on social media for a few hours. I saw the text. I saw the charts. I saw the infographics. I quickly skim read the abstract, as most people do. And my first initial reactions was, this is poorly worded, and the information, I think, is not presented in the best way. And the reason behind that is because it seems to infer superiority of manual therapy over exercise for the management of acute low back pain.
Right.
Because of this wording between should use, must use, no, should use, may use, or can use. So these are the three classifications that they've come up with. And in my opinion, and people will have disagreed with me since, but this infers, I think, an element of superiority. So I, in my normal, calm, rational, compassionate way, I quote tweeted Physio Meets Science's original post and said, how the hell are these guidelines being published, and how can they infer superiority of manual therapy over exercise or education or anything else that we use for low back pain? Now, on further reading of the guidelines, when you go down into the details, actually the authors and the guidelines themselves don't actually state that manual therapy has a superior effect over anything else. But it's just the way that they've presented it and worded it in these infographics that gives this impression. So again, there was a lot of, to and fro in discussions, debates. It all started to go off. People were left, right, and centre commenting on about, all the intricacies, the methodology, the good, the bad around these clinical guidelines. It was generating a lot of discussion, and a lot of it, I would probably say, was critical and maybe a little bit on the negative side. Now, from that, the discussions were flowing. I went to bed and I woke up the next morning and I had a couple of messages from people saying, where's the tweet that you retweeted gone? And where are all the threads that you were commenting on and posting people on? I'm like, I don't know what you mean. So I went onto Twitter and I saw that these tweets had been deleted and these threads had been deleted. So I went to the Physio Meets Science page and I direct messaged him and said, hi guys, just wanted to know where this tweet has gone, because people are asking, what's the brouhaha, what's the conversation going around it, and they can't see it anymore. And they told me that they had been told by JOSPT that they needed to delete their tweet because it was in breach of copyright infringements, which I thought was really strange. I thought that was really odd. And I'm like, one, it's an open access paper. It's freely available. They reference the paper in the link. So they put JOSPT's link in there for people to click on. They took 2 screenshots of tables out of a 60-page document. So I don't think that's, ripping the arse out of it. I don't think they are, sharing the whole thing publicly. And I think they're also, signposting people to JOSPT, the original source itself. So I don't think that breaches copyright infringement. So I, again, like I normally do in my calm, compassionate style, put a tweet out there to JOSPT to say, why are these tweets being deleted? Is it because, you wanted to take away the attention and the heat from the negative criticism around them? And JOSPT, they responded within a couple of hours saying, no, that's not the case at all. The reason we've asked people to delete these tweets is because of copyright infringement. And they finished off, and we don't appreciate your accusatory tone. So I was like, okay, well, could you expand a bit further on what these copyright principles are? Could you tell me what copyright has been infringed? Because as I understand it, with fair use policy, we're allowed to share information, particularly open access information, for purposes of education, dissemination, comment, controversy, critique, and that includes, I would say, taking excerpts from the document to be able to comment on. And I got no response. So they did not respond to these. And I asked them twice for further clarification on these copyright infringements. The next thing I got was a direct message from JOSPT. So they slid into my DMs and asked me now to delete my tweet because, again, it was breaching copyright infringements. So I sent them, well, actually, I went and sought some legal advice because I've got an ex-patient of mine who is a US lawyer and knows copyright law pretty well. So I went and tapped him up and said, could you give me a little bit of advice here? Am I breaching copyright rule? Do I need to follow the directions of JOSPT and remove this? He went away, had a look, did a bit of background checking, refreshed his memory on current copyright law, came back to me within an hour and said, you've got nothing to worry about here. Any, legal panel would say that this is well within fair use policy. There's no need to delete the tweet.
Because that's just on that then, that is an interesting one where I feel for the Physiomeat Science guys, because it might have been their first rodeo, but me and you have been caught up in not dissimilar things before, where commentary under fair use that we know it has been, especially if it's got a critical angle to it, has been something that has been a method of censorship, has been to sort of feign a version, not necessarily of copyright, but of misuse or mispractice, or people have asked or suggested for deletion. So it might well have been that, like you, as I would have had, a bit of a skeptical eyebrow raise at that before pressing the delete button. Whereas you can forgive Physiomeat Science if that is the first rodeo for them just saying, "Well, sod that. I don't want to get into that," and I can understand why.
Absolutely. So again, nothing against Physiomeat Science, nothing against anybody who deleted anything because they were advised they were in breach of copyright rules by the publishers. I've got nothing against them at all. But as you say, I had a bit of doubt. I was like, hold on a minute, this doesn't sound 100% right. I think something else is going on here. So I say, when I got that bit of legal advice, I then went back to JOSPT in the messages and said, thank you very much for your message. I've sought some legal advice and guidance. And under fair use policy, I do not think that this tweet is in breach of copyright rules. And I stipulated the reasons that this lawyer had given me. One, because, I hadn't shared the whole document. Two, I'd referenced the original source and I tagged the publishers in, and I was using it for criticism and debate and discussion, which all fall under fair use policy.
Yeah.
So I didn't get any response for that. And the next thing I got within a couple of hours was a rather lengthy, rather condescending, rather patronizing and threatening email from the copy editors of JOSPT, basically telling me to delete the tweet within 24 hours or face legal action. So they went through lots of various different things. It's a really long worded email, as I say, really condescending, really patronizing, telling me how I clearly don't understand copyright law, how I am naive for thinking that I can challenge them. Also how they said that Twitter isn't for educational use. So there is no educational purposes there. We own the copyright. I'm conflating open access with free access, all this sort of condescending stuff, and say basically at the end, if you don't delete it, further legal action will be taken. Now, I had two minds to, again, dig my heels in and say, bugger that, fuck yeah, I'm going to see how it goes. I'm going to not delete it. But on discussing it with my wife, she said, you don't need the extra hassle.
Not this again, you prick. Yes, I get it.
Yeah, she said, wind your neck in. You don't need the extra hassle. Follow their instructions, but just make it known about what's happening. So that's exactly what I've done. So I deleted their tweet.
Yeah. I heard that Sarah wanted you to dig in and you were a fucking coward, but I'll let you play that. I'll let you spin that line. That's fine.
Give me that one.
I get it. I get it. No, you're right. No, I can understand what she's meaning there. This thing cropped up this morning, I think, wasn't it? Which I'm sure you were going to get to, but I've just been able to quickly screenshot this from Twitter. I won't read it all out here, but people can go and have a little look at the tweet as to what they say. Now, I just want to kind of get into some of the inconsistencies on this, because I think one of the things that I feel I would really benefit from, and I'm sure everyone would benefit from hearing, if JSOPT have some examples of which people have been heaping praise on any given article in similar ways, and therefore sharing screenshots of something that they were then getting GUI over, and therefore driving traffic to their site, as Mitch are disseminating and improving and helping the journal from that effect. I would love to hear of people receiving similar communications from them, when therefore, because the claim is that it's almost value neutral, that they are doing so for copyright. Therefore, we would imagine on that logic that they would be behaving similarly to those that are heaping praise on any article. And I don't mean this one, by the way, because it sounds like for various reasons they've not been getting necessarily as much praise as they might have been critique from the social media community. But there's plenty of articles they're obviously fairly prolific and high profile journal. So I feel like if possible, and I say this without being sneaky, like you may well have said examples, but if possible, I think that would be beneficial for us to all see them, because at the moment it seems spiteful. And I think it's a shame if they don't realise how petty it seems, because it looks like this is a tool of censorship and a tool of stifling discussion and debate. Now, I don't know if your thoughts on my point there before I get into the weeds a little bit on the actual clinical content, if I can.
Well, it's a great point, and I've said the same thing. I want an example of where they have enforced copyright infringement law on a very well retweeted image publication or something that's been shared that's had lots of positive interaction and feedback. I explained and said to them, and to the public, give me some information where that's happened. And they also actually stated in their email to me is that they were actually screening which ones they were stipulating were in breach of copyright law, because he actually said as well in this condescending email is that we are not asking other members to delete their tweets because they have done it in a professional tone and manner. And they actually stated that. And this is conducive to constructive criticism and debate, whereas yours are not. And that, for me, that was the trigger. Then I'm like, okay, so you're saying all this copyright legal stuff, but actually you're also saying you're asking me to delete my tweet because you don't like the tone of my criticism. You prefer other people's tone.
Well, this is where you are, admittedly, and I've said this before publicly and privately, that you are the bane of mine and many people's lives, because you end up being someone that, until you're not allowed to use the internet, then some people won't rest. And the issue that I say and why you're the bane of my life is because, I am that guy that will defend your right to say it type thing, even where we might disagree. Although on this one, of course, I'm not suggesting we do. I think an area that I do want to sort of wade with you, though, and this is admittedly having not got stuck into the meat of the article, but I would say that you have been a bit of it sounds like you have been a bit snowflakish in the first instance with regards to what you sort of read on the abstract and the fact that it's like, oh, manual therapy, where's my t-shirt gone? You have been a bit triggered, haven't you?
I have been a bit triggered, but again, in all the things that I've said on social media and all the ways and all the terms and the language I've used, this has got to be down there as one of my most mild-mannered tweets that have ever gone out there. So I can't win, no matter how strongly worded I criticize something, no matter how moderate or mild I criticize something. It just seems that because of my platform and my audience, that seems to be the biggest trigger for some people when it comes to my views and opinions. It's not how I say it. It's just they don't want it said at all because of my platform and position.
No, I get that, and I think that's where I do. I think that the amount that the conversation gets ruined by people being triggered by said tone and the caricature that you've created. But also, before let's imagine they hadn't responded like that. I suppose I just want to at least spend a couple of minutes on the content, which of course I can't speak to deeply. And as you've said, especially on further reading, you've come to realise that there are some caveats in play. I find it to be, imagine that they hadn't responded as they have done, which I think is definitely what the meat of what we've been talking about and should be the scandal really compared to the actual subject matter, which I think is a shame. Tactically, as far as marketing goes, they could well be that they're watching their impact factor, they're cracking their knuckles, and they're purposely doing this. I think it's petty if they are doing, but fundamentally, I think it's going to draw attention. And here I am talking about it. I hadn't thought about
that.
Oh yeah. Well, I'm always thinking about marketing, aren't I? But yeah, I think that's one of the things. Of course, I don't think that's the conspiracy. I don't think they'd be smart enough to. But similarly, it's not going to look good for them long term. But this article is going to get some clicks. I think. Just to focus on the clinical. I suppose, imagining they hadn't responded as they did, I suppose I would say that I do think that generally speaking, it's not me saying that you reacted like in a ranty fashion. I'm just meaning like it would be wise, would it not, for you to have a slightly higher bar to being triggered over the fact that it happened to have manual therapy being weighted as it was, no?
Yes and no, all right? So again, tell me anybody who doesn't skim read something and have a knee-jerk reaction. We all do. Humans do it, all right?
My halo, mate, I don't. Of course, exactly. Not that.
So we're all prone to being triggered, and we all tend to, sometimes read things quickly, look at something quickly, and have an initial response and a guttural reaction. And that's pretty much what I had here. Now, again, on deeper reading of the paper, it's not that bad, all right? The clinical guidelines aren't the worst things in the world. And they actually do state in the guidelines that there is no superiority of one type of treatment over the other, but it's hidden within the text. It's hidden within this 60-page document. And I
And
know
it would be
clinical
interesting to know. It would be interesting to know, is that by design, or is that something that they would listen to and hear that reflection and think, actually, yeah, these graphics and some of the summarizing text doesn't represent our position as well as it could have done, and they would regret that communication. I think that's interesting because it could well be that they're representing it that way because that might be more palatable, potentially even to its members. I think that's one of the things that I'm reflecting on, is that it might well be that they've decided that there is a bit of editorial spin as to how they've done that, and I'd be interested in their opinion, especially because I imagine that the sort of the core authors of it, as well as some of the contributors, might well reflect on that.
Yeah, I get that, but research shouldn't be used for spin. Blogs are used
No,
for
I'm not.
spin.
I'm not saying it.
Media,
I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'm not. I'm
no.
just wondering. I wonder if that's the case. I'm not
Oh, okay,
justifying
yeah.
that.
Well, it could
I
well
don't
be.
like that. Yeah.
It could well be, but it shouldn't be, because again,
No. No. Fair enough.
researchers and publications, they have a responsibility and a duty to present information out there as accurately and unbiased as they can. The
Yeah.
spin then comes from obviously everybody else who starts to read it and starts to disseminate it and interpret it. It shouldn't already be spun before it starts to get spun again, if you know what I mean. Because I know damn well that clinicians skim read things, because I do it. We don't go into the details. We've got, mediocre bloody statistical literacy. We don't understand all the complexities around it. But I know those images and those graphs are going to be weaponized, okay, by certain clinicians to justify current practices or certain practices that are not really supported by the evidence base or actually by this clinical guideline. So that was my gut reaction. I was upset and annoyed that this is
Yeah.
poorly presented.
Yeah, I have some sympathies for that, because I wasn't for a second suggesting that might it be spin and therefore it's okay. I hate that, and I hate that then an institution like this would be thinking that that makes it okay for editorializing it like that. But I think it's something that I'd be interested in hearing is, are they, imagining again that the brouhaha hadn't happened, it was almost like, do they then think, actually, yeah, what has been communicated in summary and in graphic terms is not necessarily representative of the core position, and therefore that's a miscommunication between those two things? Or is it that then they're saying, actually, that's how we've decided to make things more palatable, which I wouldn't agree with, but I'd just be interested if that is the case, because you have tabloidization of everything, isn't there, these days, I guess. So I would be interested if whether that was a choice. One thing I will admit, though, is that when say you and Brad Neal and then Chris Barton Wade's on this stuff, right? And Big Brad, good friend, of course, and I'll get him on the show if he fancies having a specific right to reply on this. But Chris, I know less. But generally speaking, these are two people that what I know of them is just fans of the academy, right? These are increased, these are sort of mainstream academics of high esteem that therefore have a sort of defense of not just a scientific method, but every way in which it then moves through those circles. So when you say about me and you, or the likes of us, having mediocre statistical literacy or generally scientific literacy on the specifics of terminology and what does or doesn't come on a sliding scale of should, must, could, I think that's where I find it interesting when something like this happens. You have yourself then saying these things need to be thought about more carefully because the guideline might be weaponized for certain effect in clinical practice, but then especially then they sort of pass the nuance and saying that actually in specific academic terms, and unless you've got into every single binary piece of the statistical methodology, then you don't qualify for that necessarily, for that opinion. I feel that's where, unfortunately, something me and you have spoken about, and many others, about that sort of gap between practice and academia in many ways, that then this is an interesting thing, and certainly Brad, I haven't texted you about this, but I'll send you this link, of course, so it feels funny to talking about it, but this I think speaks to what he and others have said is a bit of a myth when people talk about a gap. I think this is emblematic of the gap, is it not?
Yeah, again, I don't want to get too in depth into this discussion because it's moving away from obviously the copyright stuff that really is the point at issue at the moment. But in an ideal world, yes, everybody should be able to have the time, the energy, and the education and the skills to be able to sit down and methodologically review, analyze, and come out with all having the same conclusion based on the information that's being presented. But that doesn't happen. So again, we all have our own spin biases. We interpret things differently. And so, it's just this way of the world, is that we're all going to see things differently, even if they're read out the same way, or we're going to interpret in the same way. But I just find, again, you know, these discussions around the finer details, they're great. They're for this sort of, you know, type of population, which is the academics and the research. When it comes to the clinical coalface, which you and I deal in, we need a bridge. We need a help across here. And infographics and tables and charts are a way to do that. So again, I just think they've got a responsibility to present the data better. They've just got a responsibility.
You've got to help us little numpties to translate this material. I think what I want to just clarify there as well is that when we're thinking about the potential consequences of what, if JSOPT are going to dig their heels in on this and imply that then that they have a different take and their lawyers have got such a different take that they're going to be heavy-handed on trying to strip back screenshots of infographics and the like, the consequences of that for dissemination of knowledge is huge. And so I look on at this, and especially having heard it, as I say, I didn't have, you know, you've really helped me with those insights. And of course, you know, I will make sure that I then find different angles, of course, to try and make sure I understand this properly as the day goes on. But I do think that that's something that could be really clumsy of them, is that if everyone ends up being dead sensitive about what they do or don't share and stuff, which tone policing is one of the big things that really has led to a lot of self-censorship. And some feel, you know, by the way, my opinion is that that's a bad thing. Many others feel that if anything, you should pore over every single word of every single tweet for at least 3 hours before you send it as a meme. You know, but some people feel that they want those sort of regulatory, self-regulatory boundaries to be there. Whereas obviously I know we've got fair kinship over speaking as mind online. I think that is something that they will really, them and others will really regret. If they set the bar for what you can and can't share when it comes to evidence dissemination, I think that's going to be a real shame, and they will kick themselves. They will cut off the nose to spite their face, to use a very British analogy.
It's a massive contradiction. You know, they want to share and support the community in dissemination of information and stuff along those lines, but they're putting so much restriction and now, you know, some anticipation and worry and stress about what can and cannot be shared. They've actually, as you say, they're probably making more work for themselves, and they're not helping knowledge translation. And they say, I think it's a massive contradiction. And this idea of being able to share images if they're cropped, and one of the reasons that I've been told this is the case, because it means there's less likely chance of misrepresentation. And I'm just like, my brain's just going, what are you on about? How does cropping an image and reducing the amount of information you're sharing actually reduce misrepresentation? Surely that must increase misrepresentation.
Well, yeah, no, there's a contradiction there, isn't there? Thank you so much to those that have the comments have come in. I can't get to them all, but just quickly, Paul has said here, I have to say, threatening to sue your customers and colleagues is frankly unbelievable. They should have reached out privately and explained their point of view, shot themselves in both feet. I think that's interesting. There was a balance of both, really, wasn't there? But the private correspondents were pretty heavy-handed anyway. It's not as if
just wanted. I engaged with them and wanted further clarification. That's all I wanted.
This is a fair point as well. I think we sit here both as Brits, US-centric. A lot of, you know, both the speaking of legalese as well as then the sort of, I know it sounds a bit unfairly cliched to say, but the sort of no win, no fee culture was born out of, you know, a very litigious society is often what he said, a geeky term, isn't it? But I think that's what's a shame. Joe has said here, really interesting discussion. Ironic that social media has the effect of making us self-censor even more. Yeah, well, I think that's the thing. I think the days I used to talk about the democratization of opinion and the fact that then we're all able to have accounts and opinions and stuff. But unfortunately, yes, self-censorship as well as then. That you can't even put this under self-censorship. You've got quite a heavy-handed approach, in my opinion, as well as that of others here from a large organisation that you should know better. And unfortunately, it's not going to foster conversation at all. So a shame. Of course, this is still early days of what I feel is a saga, and therefore I will update on future shows. But thanks a lot, Adam, for coming on, telling me the story as best you could, as well as then how you ended up getting caught up in it. Thanks for all you do as ever, and. I can't help but mention you're speaking at Therapy Live Sport next Saturday, aren't you, mate? But you're not talking about the shoulder. What the hell?
I know, mate. I'm going to be talking about when it goes wrong, getting strong, in response to everybody who tends to throw that at me at any given opportunity. Oh, you can go wrong getting strong. And I'm going to talk about that.
You need a list of caveats on a T-shirt in small print. It's going to be amusing. Right. Thank you very much, and speak soon, mate. All right. All the best.
Cheers, bud.